What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Scouting New Nets, my series analyzing the Nets' main acquisitions in the offseason. Today, we're picking up with James Johnson, who I honestly didn't really know how to feel about when the Nets first signed him, but after watching his film, I've got to say he's just a really fun player to watch. Before we do anything, make sure you subscribe below and like this video. Now let's get into it. When you hear the name James Johnson, the first thing you should think of is defense. And going through his footage, at least on the ball, he largely fits that billing. At 6'8", 240 pounds, the dude is big and can bang and push and prod with dudes on the block. And already, he might be Brooklyn's best post defender. It's very tough to move him. Here, check out how Johnson keeps his feet spread apart while leaning forward to use Ben Simmons' momentum against him. Simmons doesn't gain any ground at all, and in fact, he actually moves backwards because of the strength of Johnson. And Johnson finishes the play by flashing those super quick hands to knock the ball away. If he can land a spot in the rotation, Johnson will almost certainly be Brooklyn's guy to guard supersized wings. You know, the Giannis's, the LeBrons of the world. And speaking of that, he does that here by absorbing LeBron's blows, cutting off his driving lane before flashing those quick hands again to knock the ball away. Where his size and strength also helps him is with fronting the post. And for as big as he is, he's really solid at maneuvering his body with agility to cut guys off. Kyle Anderson is not a small dude, yet Johnson completely bumps him off his rhythm. On this play, when Johnson tags on the roll by touching on to Alex Len before rotating back to his original assignment, Rui Hachimura tries to clear space with a shoulder bump, but Johnson barely budges. A byproduct of being so freaking big is that it's tougher for James Johnson to navigate screens. He gets caught up a lot between going over and under on screens, but on a team like the Nets that switches basically everything, that deficiency may not matter. That of course opens up the possibility of Johnson guarding smaller, quicker players on switches, something he didn't do a ton of last year, but that's an issue for a different day. He's not quite as impactful off the ball. Many of his stunts are strange. They can also be lazy, or they can just flat out be non-existent. He's standing right there, at least sticking an arm to try and disturb LaMelo's dribble. He also has this weird habit of digging down, but doing it completely out of control, basically just jumping at dudes without a plan. I get that LeBron isn't a great shooter, but to leave him this open to dig down on Wesley Matthews is just weird. And you can see that, we'll call it a malaise, as a team defender bleed into other aspects of his defensive game. On this Wizards pick and roll, he rotates down as the low man to tag and account for Robin Lopez. But notice he pauses for a second, digs his heels into the ground, only to realize his original assignment is loading up a three-point shot. It wasn't all bad in terms of team defense. He does a nice job scram switching and kicking Trey Burke out of this unfavorable matchup with Nikola Jokic. And I really like his closeouts. With a 7-foot wingspan, he can very easily shrink perceived windows of space. I'm gonna keep making this point over and over again in this video, but the dude is just big, and he contested more three-pointers than any Mavericks rotation player, per 36 minutes to even out for sample size. And while most players will close out with their inside hand, Johnson is able to close out with his outside hand, but do it without fouling. One thing I realized while putting this video together in its final stages is that he's pretty average as a rebounder at best. This chart from Cleaning the Glass shows his offensive rebounding percentage and defensive rebounding percentage. In layman's terms, blue means bad, orange means good, and just looking at both of his rebounding columns, you're seeing a lot of blue. Offensively, James Johnson is unique. He's always moving on offense. Here, setting a flare screen for Lonzo Ball before slipping out of that screen and face cutting in front of his defender, Kyle Anderson, to draw contact. A quick side note, I do believe he will credibly replace DeAndre Jordan's knack for setting flare screens. Holistically speaking, Johnson could best be described as self-aware on offense. Knowing that he's not much of a shooter, we'll get into that in just a second, and rather than just standing along the perimeter for a low percentage shot, Johnson cuts into the paint to create the layup. Spacing doesn't always have to be standing along the perimeter. Sometimes the best thing you can do is cut into a sea of bodies. And while he's not the same level of cutter as, say, Bruce Brown, Johnson is a smart player that can cut backdoor if his defender helps over. Now, what I'm assuming will come as a bit of a surprise to most of you is James Johnson's handle. He's got a vicious left to right crossover that's incredibly tight for his size. And here he goes right to left this time before hitting Rui Hachimura with the sweet up and under. Between the legs moves are also in Johnson's repertoire. Good luck to opposing bigs while defending this play featuring a behind the back dribble into a Euro step through contact. In fact, Johnson's handle is so good that New Orleans used him as their zone buster, even though he doesn't really have much of a mid-range game nor floater game. But here he is, taking poor Brad Beal's ankles with him on that truly nasty left-to-right crossover with limited space. The dude's handle is just filthy. So filthy, in fact, that New Orleans and Dallas entrusted him with pick-and-roll ball handling reps. And in all honesty, I actually like Johnson more as a ball handler than as a roller, and the numbers agree with that assessment. Here's a good example of his inefficiency as a roller. He throws and chases to Lonzo Ball, but then hangs onto his screen for a second instead of just popping out, resulting in the turnover. Where I like Johnson more than pick and roll is in dribble handoff situations, again because of how fluid his handle is. He basically tees up this Lonzo Ball one dribble two-pointer by finding him specifically in transition, and then flying into Dillon Brooks with a screen. Before we get into his scoring, I wanted to touch briefly on another one of Johnson's underrated attributes, his passing. He is excellent at feeding traditional bigs in bigger lineups with Johnson at the 4, a counter to what could be spacing issues, flipping tough dump-offs to the bigs in traffic. He's got all of the traits of being a great passer, not just making great passes, but manipulating defenders with his eyes, which he does so here, first looking toward Willy Hernangomez as if he's about to pass, which pulls the attention of Jonas Valanciunas in taking away the passing lane, and then looking and jumping to the rim for the reverse, which turns Valanciunas' attention to blocking the shot, only to flip it back to Hernangomez with this sweet no-look dump-off pass. And here, the Mavericks break into their favorite set for busting zones with two players crossing paths and then screening the top two players of that zone. From there, Johnson sprints down the free lane with the oop to Porzingis. Oh yeah, he's got oops in his repertoire as well. And while he didn't toss out any high difficulty skip passes in the film that I watched, I'd wager that Johnson is a well above average passer, and the numbers certainly agree. Johnson is a bull in a china shop in transition just because of, again, his size and handle, and he welcomes contact. It's very tough to stop him with a full head of steam. In the half-court setting, he's a pretty efficient driver, quick while going north to south after getting a couple of steps in. His first step isn't that great at this point in his career. Plus, his handle and balance affords him the ability to get low while maintaining his dribble and zip past his defender. And as a Maverick, he finished quite well at the rim in Dallas's 5-out offense. Compare this to New Orleans and its crowded front court, and well, the numbers start to make more sense. I mean, just look at how many defenders are drawn in on Johnson on this play. And because Brooklyn, well, doesn't really have any spacing issues, especially after signing Paul Millsap and LaMarcus Aldridge, I could easily see Johnson having a career year as a rim finisher in Brooklyn. In general, he likes to drive right, and if he can't do that and is forced to go left, he'll usually find a way to hang in the air for an extra second and get the shot up with his right hand. Or he'll find his way for the reverse. When he uses his left hand, it's a different story. His touch just isn't as good with his offhand. And here, after he beats Jaren Jackson Jr. on the drive, he surrenders that advantage by trying to get the ball back to his right, like I was describing a second ago, which allowed Triple J to swat the shot away. And you could make the argument that he has an opening for a Euro step going middle here, but that would require a left-handed layup. and instead he ends up with whatever this is. And sure, he probably overran this drive, but this finish with his non-dominant left hand is just not pretty. That poor touch with his offhand affects his floater finishes. And in general, floater range is not a spot he especially excels from, especially on one-handed floaters. When those one-handed floaters become two-handed push shots, he's much more accurate from what I saw, evidence of his subpar touch, which permeates through his game, as made evident by his free throw shooting. Speaking of that shooting touch, his three-point shooting is... it's not pretty. This likely won't be a Jeff Green situation in which Johnson has a career year from deep playing alongside 3 superstar players, because the misses are bad and all over the place. Short, long, to the side, and whatever this is. And to me, the variance in these misses is indicative of just not really being able to shoot. And I'm not a shot doctor, but Johnson's got a lower release point combined with a slower setup, and I do wonder if that affects his control, especially in the face of a tough closeout. His jump shot struggles can bleed into the rest of his game. He travels here instead of taking the open free throw line jumper with a smaller defender guarding him. And then he's the obvious guy to help off of when players post up. Just picture Kevin Durant or, I don't know, LaMarcus Aldridge in Zion's place here. When Zion makes the obvious kickout, Johnson passes up an open 3 and then misses again when he's given a second chance. At the very least, James Johnson is a really fun player, a guy that will be a delight to watch on those load management nights. Evaluating him was really tricky for me just because he has really pronounced pluses and minuses, and a lot of times those pluses and minuses don't exactly go hand in hand, so he's kind of fragmented as a player. For example, he's got some pretty nice finishing moves and he can handle the ball, but he isn't a great screener, at least from what I saw. The jump shot is obviously a huge obstacle, and there just are plays where he's sort of limited standing to the side. Even on defense, the post defense is very real and it's going to be useful for the Nets, but I didn't find him to be especially active off ball, and I had this idea in my head that he is this elite rebounder, and he's just kind of not. I don't think he's going to be this year's Jeff Green in terms of being a veteran's minimum steal, but I did come away from his tape a lot more impressed than I thought I would be, which is exciting. I like learning new things about players, and he's got a lot of intriguing skills. But with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe, and go ahead and share this on Twitter and Reddit. If you said, hey, this was a really good video, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I post all of my stuff there. And speaking of content, I just launched a brand new Brooklyn Nets podcast called The Clear Out through Blue Wire Podcasts. Episode 1 is up now with Mike Prada, who is a huge inspiration for me. Go ahead and subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps a new show like this on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And speaking of links below, go ahead and check out my Patreon, which effectively works as a tip jar to keep me afloat during this 2021-2022 season. I think that's all I've got to plug today. I know it was a little bit longer. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace!